Hi, I am Tony Russo, and this is In Case You Missed It from Kates-Boylston for the week ending Friday, January 23rd, 2025. We've got a bunch of cool stuff this week. We're going to talk about a chat that I had with Carlos Caseta, who is the CEO of Carriage, and I'll be reporting on that in the next edition of Funeral Service Insider, the newsletter. We also have an interesting funeral home name change, some more cemetery things going on that I think you'd like to know about, and another rundown of the week's news. But before we get to that, let's hear from our friends and sponsors at Passages International. Today's families are asking for greener, more meaningful funeral options, but many funeral homes are still struggling to meet that demand. With 68% of consumers expressing interest in sustainable choices, the gap between what families want and what many providers offer is widening. For more than 25 years, Passages International has helped funeral homes stay ahead of evolving expectations with biodegradable, fair trade, and innovative memorial products that resonate with today's families. Discover how sustainability can strengthen your service offerings at passagesinternational.com. First up, as I hit, publish last week on the episode, I got an email from Carriage. We all got emails from Carriage saying that it has maintained its dividend again and will pay out a dividend of $11.25 per share. This is, I believe, the 15th year in a row that they're doing it. So that is it's not just good for stability. It's just that's how the markets are like, well, this is a company that is going to do what they need to make sure they pay their dividends. But then this week, as I'm recording this on Thursday the 22nd, I had a nice chat with Carlos Caseta, who is the CEO of Carriage and is no longer the COO of Carriage. He has done a little bit of a shakeup. It's interesting. It's not really a shakeup if everybody just gets promoted and nobody gets fired, I think. But the point is that they did a minor restructuring of their executives and again is part of a plan for stability. And now I have the whole conversation will be reported in next week's Funeral Service Insider, the newsletter. But some of the cool takeaways are the idea that they're restructuring the executives so that they are being more efficient, but also rewarding hard work. One of the things that Carlos said when we were talking was, this is the kind of place where we have a meritocracy. And he rose to his position just, by hard work, and everyone there apparently has. And this, among other things, and like I said, I'm going to talk about the weedy stuff in next week's FSI, but this is, among other things, a signal to the rest of the employees. It is like, yes, this is a place where there's plenty of upward mobility. A lot of the people who were moved up were but were retitled and compensated to kind of show why they had risen and that they were doing jobs that the company felt was critical. So expect some really fun things from Carriage, and I guess this will be coming out not much longer before their finances are published and they have their conference call. And of course, we'll report on that here, unless you don't want us to. I mentioned in last week's newsletter, and I mentioned, I believe, on last week's episode, but I'll mention it one more time. I got somebody who complained that I was doing too much corporate coverage, and it was only one complaint, but I want to take it seriously. So if you guys feel like we are doing too much corporate coverage, just shoot me an email. And as I said in last week's newsletter, I will continue to do the coverage. I'll just give it less space because I think it's important. I think it's important to know what the large companies are doing. Sometimes I think it can help you make your own decisions, or at least let you know what kind of, recruiting you're up against when you're looking for help. So feel free to shoot me an email. Link to all of those things are in the show notes. So for the also second week in a row, I get to report on heroism during a fire at a funeral home. So Cook Brothers Funeral Directors in Fairburn, Georgia, was on fire, and early reports said that Pastor Tamarcus Cook ran into the building against the wishes of first responders to rescue the remains of 5 individuals entrusted to his care. And later reporting revealed that it was actually one of his cousins that ran in, but also he ran in, but also the first responders ran in. There were, I think, more bodies than originally reported and more participation than originally reported. But I just still love the story. They were able to get in and they were able to get all of the cremated remains out. The cousin, who was not named in this reporting that I have, was also was hospitalized for injuries sustained during his attempt to pull the bodies out of the fire. But the first responders did also participate, which is again important because it wasn't part of the original reporting. But I have a link to the story in the show notes to the new story, which is a heartening story because, again, this idea of really putting the decedents first and imagining how hard it would be to have to let the families know that the body was destroyed is laudable. This idea that they were able to prevent this was laudable. Anyway, link in the show notes. So I gotta tell you, I'm going to report on the classiest guy I've ever heard of. In this next little bit, I'm just going to read you a little bit and then I'll continue from there. The Brent Taylor Funeral Home in Collierville, Tennessee, has officially severed all ties with its former owner, Tennessee State Senator Brent Taylor. The funeral home's current management stated that the senator's public political commentary no longer reflects the values or mission of the business. To ensure neutral and community-focused environment, the facility is undergoing a complete rebrand, including a new name and visual identity. Now, I did as much looking into this as I could stand because it is so petty. It is crazy petty. So this former funeral director, former funeral home owner, and current state senator, and I think I've made my feelings about state representatives clear in the past, so I'm going to leave that there. Just had this little temper tantrum. He's having a tiff with the attorney general of the state, and it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing how awful and petty it is. And that is what the political content of it is secondary. I mean, I could tell it to you, but it's people who you don't know arguing about things that you do not care about unless you live in Collierville, Tennessee, apparently. But he's been going after the attorney general and just generally disparaging in public. And this is a corporately owned funeral home. Like, this isn't somebody who just disagrees with him ideologically. This is someone who bought the funeral home with the idea that we're going to keep this guy's name on it because this is an upstanding citizen and it helps to have the name. This is a conversation we've had 1,000 times. It helps to keep the name. We always say if you can keep the name and the association with the founder, then that's great. And so not only has he been not community forward as according to the people he sold it to, but now he's saying that he dumped it on him and they're not going to do a good job. And I'm sorry, he did not say they're not going to do a good job. He said, I'm not allowed to disparage them, but what I can say is that their check cleared, and I hope they can do as good a job as I did. And as far as telling your community that you do not care about them, I don't know if you can do a better job. And to get just a littlest bit political, this is clearly a person who is in an unchallengeable district. So he apparently is going to get to keep his job no matter how he treats his constituents. That's, as we know, kind of a bubbling issue in American politics generally. But just to have that much contempt for a building with your name on it, it's embarrassing. I mean, again, I think that a lot of times the state representatives are embarrassing just by the nature of their ignorance. But this is a particularly worthy one of them. So if you want to go down the state senator Brent Taylor rabbit hole, there'll be a link in the show notes, and you can reread about his petty wars with some functionary. But as they say, keep it classy, Senator Brent Taylor. Sometimes I come across a story that I think everybody knows about and I think is common practice, but also maybe it's not. So I like to ring the occasional bell. A Detroit mortician, her name is Charlie E. Rose, has released My Final Wishes Planner, which is a guided journal designed to simplify end-of-life planning. Absolutely. It makes perfect sense. I don't think that anyone doesn't have one or doesn't have some sort of material like this, but I thought that it was worth noting that she branded one and made an announcement about it. Like, I think that is what's useful about. I'm certainly not telling anyone who's listening to this that it's useful to have planning tools around to give to people who are interested in them. But the idea of making an announcement saying we are doing this, we are offering this to people so that they can do their planning if they wish. It just seems like a natural bump, and it seems like a good idea that if it hadn't occurred to you, I hope it has now. Link in the show notes. So there is it's not new. I thought it was new when I started the story. There is a storefront funeral business in East Ridge, Tennessee. It's part of a larger business, and it is owned by Yashan Long. And he's a third generation funeral director, and they were approved to, I thought they were approved to open a storefront, which I think was super cool. But as it turned out, they were just approved to change their name, which was longer. They shortened it to Horizon Cremations, and there'll be a link to that in the show notes. But I'm really interested in this storefront idea, this idea that there's a place to do arrangements, but it's not necessarily the place. Not necessarily, it is not the place where, visitations take place, or embalming or cremation or anything. It is very, very English. If you know how often the English people will have just a storefront where the funeral directors work from. But this is part of a larger company, and I think I've mentioned before there was one in Minnesota I did a story on a couple of years ago, and I just like this idea of, making it more convenient, bringing funeral service back downtown, because as you're going to see in one of my next stories, certainly you can't have a crematory any place where there are human beings here in America. So given that, this idea of having a separate standalone, place to do arrangements, I think is awesome. So more on that next week for sure, but a link to the state approval in the show notes. So the Fayetteville, Tennessee Board of Mayor and Aldermen voted against rezoning a property in that town from residential to commercial in order to block the installation of a new crematory. And we mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. I told you I didn't love their odds, and it's really interesting. And I've got a link to the show notes, and you can see some of the quotes. They are the kind of horrible ignorance that tends to come when horrible ignorant people are quoted in the newspaper. So what happened was this funeral home backs up against a kind of like industrialish complex, a business district. And so its property is next to the business district, but its property is zoned for residential only. What it wanted to do was put a crematory in the business district section of its property, and it wanted to get that section rezoned for commercial use so that it could put in a crematory. And of course, the NIMBYs came out. 5 people showed up. And 5 people were able to keep this business from expanding. The vote was 3-2, with 1 person abstaining from the vote. And I will never get tired of being exhausted by the Not in My Backyard Brigade, only because the tantrum aspect of it is just very culturally significant. You know, we often are a people who just do not want anything that makes us uncomfortable anywhere near our lives, and we feel like we deserve it. And, you know, unfortunately, the difficulty about living in a society is a lot of times what you want and you think you absolutely need is the exact opposite of what I want and what I think I absolutely need. And, you know, our tactic has just been to throw ourselves on the floor like toddlers and scream until we get what we want. And, you know, squeaky wheel gets the grease. And this funeral home does not get to remain, does not get to expand and be able to offer cremation services to its neighbors because 5 people are afraid of being near a place where they, you know, where they have a crematory. It's just, again, I've said this before. I say this almost every time. There's a crematory about 100 yards from my house. I didn't have a problem with it before I started this job. And I actually didn't even know about it until not long before I started this job. And I've been here 30 years. And it's one of those things, you know, if you could keep it out of the paper, no one would know it was there. Especially with today's modern cremation solutions, which don't be surprised if I have a little something on modern cremation solutions in the coming months. But for now, there's a link to this story in the show notes if you want to hear all of the terrible reasons that crematories are bad and community-destroying machines that must be stopped at all costs. And that will do me for this time. In case you missed it, is a Kates-Boylston production. It was written and edited and videoed by me, Tony Russo. Please subscribe wherever you're listening now. We would love to get some feedback if you'd like to send us any. If I'm saying too much, if I'm saying not enough, I will try to accommodate, and we will check in with you next time.